1776 it caught fire, so I can't explain that one, especially in a room with no fireplaces. But anyway, here's the thing. Americans, they were British. That's what we were. You know, maybe you were born in Britain, maybe your father, your grandfather was, but most people, that's how they think of themselves. Their rights as Englishmen were really important to them, same as anybody living across the ocean. If you were accused of a crime and put on trial in this courtroom as a British subject, you would stand in a prisoner's cell, which for us Americans definitely doesn't fit. We stopped using this in the early 1800s. However, even though I'm in a cage in a British courtroom, I am innocent until proven guilty. I have a lawyer to defend me. I get a public trial, you guys, which means it is fair because people are watching. And then most importantly, I've got a 12-man jury in that back right-hand corner, a jury of my peers, of people just like me, that are going to decide whether or not I am guilty. And of course, all of that we do in the United States today. Because back then we liked it, and we still like it now. But again, in 1775, Americans are worried the British are taking these things away from them. And by 1775, they are ready to fight to protect those rights. So the first really kind of world-changing type event that's going to take place in this building is going to happen in June of 1775. Just a month after Congress starts meeting in Philadelphia, back-to-back days, June 14th and 15th, they're going to, number one, create an American army. They're going to create an army to fight a war against their own government. That's a big thing. 13 separate colonies agreed to work together. The next day, they're going to pick a man to lead that army. To me, this is going to be one of the most important decisions they've ever made in this building, because the guy they would pick, obviously, well, let me ask one of the kids, who did they pick to be in command of our army, guys? Eventually our first president.
Good, Alex.
There you go, George Washington, right. Wait till we get to the hard questions. You guys got to know that. So yeah, George Washington is picked to command the army. Now the reason I think this is so important, this war is going to last 8.5 years. He's the one and only commander we're going to have for all that time. So he's going to turn out to be the perfect choice. Now they don't know all this. What they're doing here in this building is they're writing letters to the king. They're actually asking the king if he'll help. Now the king's not going to answer any of the letters. And they're actually, you know, if I were his advisor, I'd tell him not to. There's no reason he should answer these guys. Number one, he's never heard of the Continental Congress. Number two, they're fighting against him, so he's certainly not very happy with them. And number three, they're not part of the British system of government. If nothing else, the British are very organized. These guys are kind of inventing themselves over there. So, you know, he's going to ignore their letters. But the other side of the coin, King George cannot ignore a war. The British government cannot ignore a war that's going to cost them money and people and so on. So they do send over a proclamation, an announcement, a really strongly worded letter, whatever you want to call it. It basically says anybody involved in this rebellion in America is a traitor. Treason. Now think about treason as a crime in this courtroom. The British will give you a fair trial. But if you're found guilty of treason, well, back then, rope around the neck and punishment, death by hanging. So think if you're one of those guys across the hall. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to know that they're talking about you in that letter from the British government. So you've got that choice. Do I go home and say, okay, we're sorry, Britain, we give up, we'll do what you say, or do you keep fighting? Well, of course, they're going to keep fighting. The war will grow. Thomas Paine writes a little book published 4 blocks away called Common Sense. Actually, 2 days after that British proclamation shows up. Perfect timing for Paine. He's unknown at the time, but that book will be one of the most important books ever published in America, because he argues we're fighting the wrong war. What are we doing worrying about ourselves as Englishmen? It's time to think about ourselves as Americans and realize we're better off without the British. So that idea of independence will spread. So let's think about the summer of 1776. It's June. 5 men are chosen. They do a pretty good job with our committee that writes what we know today as the Declaration of Independence. Number one, you have John Adams from Massachusetts. Now, John Adams, of course, will eventually be our second president, but in 1776, John Adams is probably the guy getting getting more done in Congress than anyone else. He's one of the guys pushing to create the Army. He's one of the guys pushing for Washington to lead it, to create a Navy, all kinds of other things. The next guy on the committee came from north as well, Robert Livingston from New York. He's not as famous a name for most of us, but he goes back to that stamp tax, 10 years defending American rights. From Connecticut would come a man named Roger Sherman. Now he's probably a guy that you should know if you don't. There's only 2 men who have signatures on Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, U.S. Constitution. He's one of them, Roger Sherman. The other is Robert Morris of Pennsylvania, by the way. So you got Sherman, Livingston, Adams. Then they picked the most famous man in America to sit on that committee. 70-year-old Benjamin Franklin. In fact, I would argue